On the night of my parents' anniversary, I sat at a table filled with relatives who barely noticed my presence. The moment that should have been about celebrating 35 years of marriage turned into a stage for humiliation. My sister's son walked over, grinning, holding a cup of soda. He looked me dead in the eyes and shouted, "Mom said, you don't belong here," before pouring it straight into my lap. The cold liquid soaked my dress, the sticky sweetness clinging to my skin, while the entire table erupted in laughter, including my own parents. I smiled faintly, wiped my clothes, and kept quiet. But inside, something shifted. That same night, I logged into my account and took my name off their loan. By morning, her shiny SUV was gone. And at 8:20 a.m., someone knocked on my door. And when I opened it, everything changed. Have you ever been treated like an outsider within your own family? Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Please share your story in the comments so I know I am not alone. Hi, my name is Bonnie, 33 years old, living alone in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon. My life revolves around the coffee and bakery shop I have built for nearly 8 years. It is more than just a job. It is my source of comfort, a space I designed with my own hands. From the smell of freshly baked bread to the way the little flower pots are placed on each table. The shop is proof of my independence, a part of my life that no one in my family has ever cared about or praised. I learned to smile whenever they mentioned Sophia, my older sister, as if the world revolved around her alone. That May, my parents celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. The party was held at an upscale restaurant by the lakeside in Seattle with wide glass windows looking out over the glittering water at sunset. I drove nearly 4 hours from Portland, carrying with me a small gift of finely crafted silver picture frame I had ordered, especially hoping my parents could keep a new memory inside it. The moment I stepped in, I felt out of place. The elegant setting, the cheerful laughter, the relatives talking warmly with one another. It all felt like a perfectly rehearsed play. I appeared like a supporting actor, unnoticed without a greeting beyond indifferent glances. Sophia sat at the center of the table with her husband and their 12-year-old son, Ethan. Every eye in the room was on them. My father spoke proudly of Sophia's achievements, as if she was their only pride. Her newly opened fashion boutique, her contracts with major brands. My mother followed with a glowing smile, adding every little detail to make sure everyone knew how perfect her eldest daughter was. I sat quietly at the corner of the table, trying to look normal, only turning my glass of water in my hands. No one asked about my coffee shop, nor did they mention the small award I had just received from the local business association. I was a shadow in that sparkling family portrait. In the middle of everyone raising their glasses for a toast, Ethan suddenly stood up. He held a cold glass of soda and slowly walked toward me. At first I thought he was only trying to tease me, but the way his eyes locked on mine told me something was wrong. With the whole table watching, Ethan stopped, lifted his chin, and shouted, "Mom said, you don't belong here." Then, without a moment of hesitation, he poured the soda straight into my lap. The icy liquid spread quickly, sticky and sweet, soaking through my dress. I froze while the entire table erupted in laughter as if they had just witnessed a brilliant comedy act. I lifted my head and looked around, hoping at least someone would speak up, but my father only shook his head and chuckled. Kids will be kids. He's just being honest. My mother patted Sophia on the shoulder, laughing lightly. He only said what was on his mind. Don't take it to heart. Sophia smiled triumphantly, not offering a single word of apology. As the laughter carried on, I simply picked up a thin napkin and slowly dabbed at the spreading stain on my dress. I forced a faint smile. No reaction, no argument. My whole body trembled, not from the cold, but from the undeniable truth that struck me at that moment. They had never considered me a part of this family. As I sat in the car leaving that anniversary celebration, I let memories wash over me in layers like waves hitting the shore. And suddenly, everything became clearer than ever. That evening was not a beginning. It was the inevitable result of years of being placed in the role of an outsider within my own family. From a young age, my parents created two different worlds under the same roof. The first world belonged to Sophia, the perfect daughter, the brilliant pride of the family. The second world, small and faint, belonged to me. I still remember when I was in 4th grade on Sophia's birthday. The whole family threw an outdoor party with balloons, a 3-tier cake, neighbors, and friends filling the yard. My parents stood together, eyes shining with happiness, proudly telling everyone that their eldest daughter had won an academic award and was definitely going to a top university. A year later, for my birthday, the small gift box contained only a store-bought card from the local grocery. No party, no special wishes. I remember smiling and saying thank you, but then I sat on my bed for a long time, clutching the card while tears streamed down my face. Sophia grew up receiving the best of everything. When she graduated high school, my parents gave her a brand new Toyota Corolla, while for me, 4 years after I graduated, there was only a message. Congratulations. Remember to work hard so you can buy what you need yourself. I tried to comfort myself that perhaps I was stronger, didn't need as much help as Sophia. But as I grew older, I understood that this favoritism was not because I lacked effort. It was because, in my parents' eyes, I had never been a child worthy of pride. When Sophia got married, all the favors and privileges continued to flow in her direction, from her first house to a trip across Europe. And later, when she had a child, everything was either paid for by my parents or proudly flaunted to relatives. Meanwhile, I was studying while working part-time, struggling to cover tuition and rent. No one ever asked if I needed help. It was simply assumed that I was fine. I will never forget the only time I asked my mother for a small loan to fix my old car. She sighed and said, "Honey, we can't always be reckless with money. You have to learn to take care of yourself." Yet, only weeks later, they bought Sophia and her husband a brand new sofa set worth several thousand as a wedding starter gift. As Ethan, Sophia's son, grew older, the favoritism stretched into the next generation. Every time Ethan was disrespectful, my parents laughed it off, saying, "Kids, being playful is cute." Once he mocked my weight in front of everyone, and instead of correcting him, my mother turned to me and said, "You really should lose some weight." He's not wrong. I had never felt so small. Even though I promised myself countless times that I would keep my distance, I still returned during holidays, still brought gifts, still held on to the hope that one day my parents would see I too deserved to be loved. The most painful moment came from my father, the one I once believed would be fair. He pressured me into co-signing a loan so Sophia could open her fashion store. At that time, I had just started my coffee and bakery shop, still struggling to raise enough capital. But my father said bluntly, "You're the only one in the family with a good enough credit score. This is family business. Don't let us down." I remember sitting in my room that night for hours, pen trembling in my hand, knowing that if I signed, I would be taking on a risk that was never mine to bear. But I signed anyway because I still longed to be recognized as a beautiful daughter, as a true member of the family. I thought that if I helped Sophia, maybe my parents would finally look at me differently. All those memories rushed back when Ethan poured the icy soda into my lap during the anniversary dinner. The uproarious laughter around the table was not just about a child's prank. It felt like a blade, confirming that the years I had been pushed to the margins were never imagined. They had raised a child bold enough to spit on my worth because my parents had never considered me worthy of sitting at the same table as them. Remembering every holiday, every gift, every indifferent glance, I realized this moment was no longer a fresh wound, but the final verdict on a past that had been abandoned. On the highway from Seattle back to Portland, the yellow lights stretched into blurred streaks ahead. Usually after being hurt by my family, I would cry, torment myself, then find excuses for them. That my parents were getting old, that Sophia only wanted to impress, that Ethan was still too young to understand. But that night was different. I did not cry. There was none of the usual tightness in my chest. What I felt more than anything was a cold emptiness, as if I had stepped out through a door I had never truly been allowed to open. I looked into the rear-view mirror at the city fading behind me and thought to myself, they never saw me as one of them. Never. As the car turned onto the familiar streets leading back to the small apartment where I live, I replayed the mocking looks from around the table. The laughter that followed the cold soda as it spread across my dress, my parents' applause, Sophia's triumphant face, all of it unfolded like a slow-motion film. I had endured 33 years, believing that if I tried a little harder, sacrificed a little more, they would finally open their arms. But tonight, sitting in the dark of my old car, with the scent of asphalt mingling with the soda still clinging to my dress, I knew I had been wrong. There was no place for me in this family. And the cruelest thing was not my silence, but that they had never wanted me to speak. When I stepped into the small apartment, I did not turn on the light right away. I sank into the worn sofa and listened to my heart pounding. The place was cramped, but quiet, the smell of pastries lingering from that morning's batch. I rested my head on the armrest, closed my eyes, and for the first time felt a faint glimmer of light in the stillness. I did not have to keep carrying their burdens anymore. I did not need to live to prove myself to people who had never acknowledged me. Opening my laptop, the dim blue screen seemed like the start of something else. I logged into my bank account, scrolled through the cold numbers, and stopped at the loan information. The line cosigner Bonnie tightened in my chest. It was the invisible chain that had tied me to Sophia and my parents for the past 2 years. I remembered the day I signed the papers, my father placing his hand on my shoulder and saying, "You're doing this for the family. One day you'll understand." But today I understood. I understood that it had all been a way for them to exploit my devotion to feed Sophia's privilege. My fingers trembled as I hovered the cursor over the withdraw authorization button. I hesitated for a few seconds as if a last trace of guilt still lingered. Then I took a deep breath and clicked. The screen blinked and a message appeared. "Your request has been processed." In that moment, it felt as if someone had just loosened a rope around my chest. I sank back into the chair and let out a quiet laugh. Not a laugh of joy, but of utter relief. I had cut it off. I no longer carried their burdens. I did not sleep right away that night. I sat by the small window, watching the streetlights spill into the silent darkness of the room. I thought about the years that had passed, the meager greeting cards, the parties where I was forgotten, the times I was mocked in front of others, and all the moments I had turned a blind eye in the faint hope that my family would change. All of it now lined up into a long chain leading to this exact moment. If it had not been for Ethan Soda, perhaps I would have kept enduring, kept clinging to the collar of so-called family ties. But now it was different. That glass of soda and the collective laughter that followed was the bell that rang the end. I closed the laptop and stood walking to the small kitchen table where I usually prepared dough. My hand brushed the glass jar of yeast, a familiar object tied to my daily work. I realized that my life, my work, the joy I found in the coffee and bakery shop had all been built by me alone with no contribution from them. And if I could build so much by myself, I could surely continue without carrying anyone else's weight. Before going to bed, I looked at myself in the mirror at the faint stain still marking my dress, and I smiled. It was a calm smile, not because I was pleased to imagine Sophia in trouble, but because I knew I had chosen the right path. For the first time in years, I felt free, a simple yet powerful kind of freedom. The freedom to refuse being the one who carried the weight for those who had never valued me. And inside me, a firm truth echoed. From this moment on, I owed them nothing. The next morning, I woke to the blare of a tow truck's horn outside. Fresh sunlight filtered through the curtains, and the mist of early dawn still lingered along the sidewalk. I stepped onto the small balcony of my apartment, a cup of hot coffee in hand. Just across the street in front of Sophia's polished home, a bright yellow tow truck was slowly backing up, Neighbors had gathered in small clusters, whispering and pointing. Hooked tightly to the back, Sophia's luxury SUV, barely a year old, was lifted inch by inch. The scene was not loud, yet the silence laced with murmurs made it feel like a public declaration. The lavish image Sophia once flaunted had been stripped bare. I stood there making no effort to hide, calmly sipping my coffee. For the first time, I felt no nervousness about the consequences. The car was hauled away, leaving behind an empty driveway and the uneasy stares of the neighbors. I knew the news would spread quickly through the neighborhood. The same people who used to gossip about the dresses Sophia wore, the European trips she boasted about on social media. And now they would be talking about the SUV towed away in broad daylight. At 8:00 sharp, a frantic pounding on the door announced itself so urgently that before I could set my coffee down, I already knew who it would be. I opened the door, and just as I expected, Sophia stood there. Her face was pale, her blonde hair a tangled mess as if she had rushed over. In her hands, she clutched a crumpled stack of loan documents, the pages wrinkled and creased as though she had balled them up in anger. Seeing me, she offered no greeting, no explanation. She immediately screamed, "You are destroying the family!" All because of a child's prank. Her voice echoed down the hallway and caused a few neighbors to peek from behind their doors. I remained standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other folded across my chest. I looked straight into her panicked eyes without saying a word. My silence felt like a thick wall, which only made her more unhinged. Sophia thrust the papers toward me, flipping through numbers and bank statements as if the ink could rewrite reality. "Do you understand?" she cried. "The shop rent, Ethan's tuition, the credit cards, it all depends on you. How could you withdraw your name from the loan? Do you think you can live separately? This is family." I did not move. I felt her fury and the desperation in her voice. Yet, strangely, I felt no guilt. Instead, a calm settled over me as if after years of being placed beneath others. My balance had finally shifted. Sophia kept speaking, her voice breaking. "Mom and Dad will never forgive you. They will see you as a traitor. Are you happy to watch us lose everything?" In that moment, I suddenly realized something I had never seen so clearly before. My strength had never come from making them happy, but from my right to choose. I had signed as a co-signer out of pressure, out of a desperate desire to be acknowledged. And now it was also my right to cut it off. My silence left Sophia choking on her words. She waited for me to justify myself, to tremble and apologize, but all she got was a calm, steady gaze. After a long pause, Sophia exhaled sharply, her arm falling limp, the papers nearly slipping from her grasp. I saw her fingers trembling, not from the cold, but from the dawning realization that I would no longer be the shield they could hide behind. Before turning away, she threw out one last line. "You'll regret this." I gave a slight nod, a careless acknowledgement, then closed the door. The click of the lock sounded like a full stop. I stood in the quiet apartment, listening to the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, and for the first time in years, I did not feel dragged down by their unreasonable demands. The feeling was hard to describe, not triumphant joy, but a profound relief, as if an invisible chain had just slipped from my wrist. I poured myself more coffee, sat down on the sofa, and drew a deep breath. Outside, Sophia was surely calling our parents, crying, accusing me. But inside this apartment, all that remained was stillness and a new kind of power, the power to decide my own fate. The morning after Sophia's SUV was towed away, the days that followed became a storm of relentless calls and messages. My phone rang every hour, and every time the screen lit up, it was my mother's or my sister's name. At first, their voices tried to sound gentle, as if a small concession from me could return everything to normal. "Bonnie, don't make this worse. Sophia just made a mistake. You're her sister. You should let it go." My mother's tone was the same one she had always used to excuse my sister's faults, but right after the pleading came the subtle threat. If you don't undo this, your father and I will consider you no longer part of this family." Sophia was different. The messages she sent to my phone came in a relentless stream like bullets. At one moment, she begged, "Bonnie." I spoke without thinking. "Please help me just this once. Ethan still needs to go to school. I can't manage alone." But only minutes later, her tone would flip. "I don't believe you dare do this to your own family. Do you really think you can live in peace? Don't forget who gave you this name." I read each line as it appeared, never replying, only saving them as if I were archiving proof of an old habit, their way of forcing me into submission through guilt. The worst of all was Ethan. He was only 12, yet his behavior already carried the arrogance nurtured by years of indulgence. One afternoon, I opened my phone to see a new notification. It was a TikTok video. Ethan standing with a few friends, pretending to pour soda over his clothes, howling with laughter, then staring straight into the camera and saying, "Aunt Bonnie doesn't belong here." The mocking laughter that filled the video made me feel both furious and sick to my stomach. I remembered the moment that freezing soda spilled into my lap at the anniversary dinner, and now the boy had turned it into a public joke. I tried to push it aside and continue with my work at the coffee and bakery shop, but it did not end there. One late evening, as I locked up and walked into the parking lot, I froze. My old car sat quietly under the streetlight, but its body had been slashed with deep scratches running from front to back, the paint peeled in jagged streaks. My hands shook with anger, but before I could react, my eyes fell on the shop's front window. A large crack split across the glass. The pane shattered into a spiderweb pattern, fragments scattered across the sidewalk. I stood still for a few seconds, stunned, a wave of fear and bitterness rising inside me. They had brought their spite into my work, into the place I had built with my sweat and tears. I took a deep breath and hurried to check the security cameras. The screen showed the undeniable scene in clear detail. Ethan and another boy, both wearing hoodies, were laughing like they were putting on a show. One of them used a key to scratch my car, while Ethan swung a club at the shop window, filming with his phone as he went. When the glass cracked, they laughed in delight, and Ethan even turned to the camera and made a mocking gesture. I sat frozen in front of the screen, but instead of crying or collapsing like I would have before, a different feeling rose up inside me. Enough. I could not stay silent one more time. I could not keep letting them think I would endure forever, that I would bear all the consequences to preserve so-called family ties. That night, I did not take long to decide who should be the first to see the evidence. I immediately sent the video of Ethan and his friend vandalizing my car and smashing the shop window to Uncle Ray, my father's younger brother, a man I had always considered a quiet support within the family. Rai had worked many years in the legal field before retiring, and on many occasions he had been the only one to encourage me and tell me to stand tall when they put me down. When Ray received the file, his voice over the phone was calm, but sharp. "Send me everything you have. I will look and tell you what to do. But hear me if you let this pass. They will think you have no value. They will push further." His words were both a warning and a push I could not ignore. I felt myself strengthen. It was time not only to protect my property, but to protect my dignity and my safety. The next morning, Ray came to the shop with a stern face, carrying a bag of documents and his laptop. We sat in front of the screen, reviewing every frame, every second. The two boys in hoodies approaching, Ethan laughing as he struck the glass, holding up his phone as if he were filming a comedy. Rai pointed to each detail, noting the time, date, and camera angle, confirming that all the footage had timestamps and showed no sign of tampering. "This is solid evidence," he said. "We'll take it to the police, and I'll go with you when you make your statement. At the same time, I'll contact a civil attorney to explore compensation and possible charges for vandalism and defamation if necessary." A strange sense of reassurance washed over me, not because I wanted revenge, but because for the first time in years, I felt that a legal process was standing on my side. That afternoon, we went to the police station. The officer who took my report was a middle-aged woman named Investigator Lee. She listened carefully as I recounted everything from the anniversary dinner, the words, "You don't belong here," to the TikTok video, and the threatening messages. Ray sat beside me, occasionally adding details about the bank accounts, the co-signed loan, and the list of preserved evidence. After reviewing the video, Investigator Lee noted in the report evidence of property damage, harassment, and potential involvement of a minor. She continued, "We already have a few complaints related to Ethan in his school record, but until now, there hasn't been strong visual proof like this. This time it could lead to criminal charges or be entered into the juvenile system for intervention. We will open a case file, assign a case number, and appoint an investigator. You need to keep the evidence intact. Do not delete or alter any files." For the first time, I heard the words, "open a case file," without feeling fear. Instead, there was a sense of tangible support. In the days that followed, the police called back to inform me they would be contacting Ethan's school to verify prior reports. They also invited several witnesses, regular customers of mine who had seen the vandalism, to come in and give statements. At the same time, Rai helped me draft a letter to the bank confirming that I had withdrawn my name from all documents tied to Sophia's shop, closing off any legal loopholes they might use to shift responsibility. He also reminded me of the possibility of a civil suit. In addition to the costs of repairing the window and the car, we could seek damages for emotional distress. Since the actions were clearly intended to humiliate and harm my reputation, the legal path became clear: criminal proceedings for vandalism and harassment, juvenile proceedings for Ethan, which could mean mandatory counseling, community service, and educational intervention, and civil proceedings to restore both financial and personal damages. Word of the incident began to ripple through the neighborhood. Some neighbors voiced support, while others grew awkward and kept their distance. A few calls even came from Sophia's suppliers checking in and reporting that there had been suspicious transactions involving my name evidence. Ray urged me to safeguard for the civil case. My life became unsettled with emails, calls from Ethan's school, and the steady pulse of an investigation taking shape. Yet, with every step in the legal process, my resolve grew firmer. I was no longer the passive one. I was the one initiating justice for myself. And when Ray patted my shoulder before leaving, he said, "You did the right thing. Let the law handle the rest." I looked at the computer screen at the frozen frame of Ethan laughing in mockery and felt a new determination rising inside me. Never again would I allow anyone, not even those bound by blood, to turn my worth into a joke. As the legal procedures began to fall into place, I knew there was another matter I had to decisively address: the invisible financial ties I had long allowed my family to manipulate. Those ropes were not loud or visible, but they bound me tightly to the cycle of Sophia and our parents, turning me into a steady support they could lean on whenever they were in trouble. If I truly wanted freedom, I had to sever everything. I sat at the small kitchen table in my apartment and spread the papers out in front of me. The stacks of documents I had signed under pressure and in tears now looked like marks of weakness. First, there was Sophia's shop lease. 2 years earlier, it was my father who had forced me to sign as a co-tenant to help your sister start her business. I still remember his heavy handshake and the stern voice. "You're the only one in the family with good credit. If you don't help, Sophia will collapse from the start. Family must protect each other." Back then, I foolishly thought that sacrifice would make them see me differently. Instead, I became the shadow standing behind while they boasted about the store as if it were all Sophia's work alone. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account and the landlord's portal, and sent an official notice withdrawing my name from the lease, attaching a copy of the release that Ray's lawyer had prepared. It was a single click, but it felt like cutting through a heavy chain around my neck. Next came the e-commerce accounts and business licenses I had once put under my name for Sophia. When she first opened her boutique, she didn't meet the legal requirements to register for PayPal, Stripe, or even a tax ID. My parents turned to me instead, insisting, "You understand technology. Help your sister out." I handled everything, filling out forms, opening accounts, even filing taxes. Yet, in return, I received only dismissive remarks. Now, staring at the lines of information tying my name to Sophia's shop, I felt a chill. If I left it untouched, any fraud or mishandling on her part could collapse onto me. I contacted the platforms directly, submitted requests to close the accounts, and attached documentation proving the information was being used beyond its original purpose. Each confirmation email that returned with the words, "Account has been deactivated," felt like a cold snip of scissors, cutting through strands of a web they had tangled around me for years. The third step was the secondary credit card my parents had forced me to open. I remembered how my mother once held my hand, her voice sweet. "You're the responsible one. Put your name on a card for the family just in case of emergencies." Foolishly, I believed it would make me an important part of the family. But those emergencies quickly turned into countless shopping sprees for Sophia clothes, jewelry followed by bills shoved at me to cover for now. I had paid more than I could count just to keep the peace. Now, I called the bank directly, demanded the cancellation of every supplementary card, and made it clear I would no longer be responsible for any charges. The bank representative confirmed in an even voice, "The secondary accounts have been terminated. You are now responsible only for your primary account." I closed my eyes and felt relief spreading through me. Step by step, I unraveled every tie that had sunk me deeper into my parents' and Sophia's control. I organized all the paperwork, compiled it into a single file, and attached the statement prepared by Ray's lawyer. When I finished, I sat quietly in the midday light, an unfamiliar calm settling over me. I knew that my actions would bring serious consequences for the family, but that was the price of truth. They had grown used to living off my sacrifices, and now they had to learn to stand on their own feet. Just a week later, the results were unmistakable. Sophia's boutique closed. A sign reading "closed until further notice" was taped to the glass where the flashy grand opening banner my mother once photographed and boasted about had hung. I heard from a few acquaintances that the landlord had posted an eviction notice because there was no longer anyone guaranteeing the lease. The deactivation of the online merchant accounts caused the boutique's web store to collapse as well. Sophia called me incessantly, her voice with screaming, and my mother left long messages condemning me as cruel to my own blood. But I no longer trembled or felt tormented inside. The family fell straight into debt. I overheard through relatives, credit cards frozen, Ethan's tuition unpaid, the previous loans suddenly demanded by the bank. The glamorous image they had built began to crack into pieces. And for the first time, I did not feel guilty. I felt that I had done what was necessary to survive, to protect the life I had painstakingly built for myself. One rainy afternoon, I sat in my coffee and bakery shop, watching customers come and go, listening to the hum of laughter and conversation as the sweet smell of pastries filled the air. My heart felt lighter, as if it had been washed clean. I knew the battle was not over, that they would still try to pull me back into the old cycle. But by now, I had something they would never have: freedom. And I silently vowed that whatever the cost, I would hold on to it. I thought that withdrawing my name from the loans and closing all the connected accounts was the final period at the end of the sentence. I thought the family would slowly accept the truth that I was no longer their backup wallet. But fate seemed to have its own way of exposing the secrets they had tried so hard to bury. And this time, I was no longer the victim, but the witness to every mask falling away. One late afternoon, as I was cleaning up the cafe, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. On the other end was a trembling female voice. "Excuse me, are you Bonnie?" I confirmed, and she introduced herself as Hannah. She had once worked as a sales clerk at Sophia's boutique. I vaguely remembered her face, a young woman who often stood behind the counter whenever I stopped by, though we had never spoken much. Hannah's words came quickly, as if she feared she might lose her courage if she slowed down. "I don't want to get dragged into this, but I can't take it anymore. I have messages where Sophia and your mother talked about setting you up. My body went cold, my heart racing. Hannah continued, her voice breaking. They said you were unstable, that they had to make everyone believe you weren't capable of handling finances. I accidentally saw it in a WorkG group out chat, and I saved it. I arranged to meet Hannah at a different cafe a few blocks away from mine to avoid curious eyes. She arrived looking anxious, clutching her phone tightly. On the screen, she showed me screenshots of messages. Sophia had written to my mother. We need to prove Bonnie has problems. If she loses credibility, the bank won't trust her word. My mother replied, yes, I'll subtly tell the relatives that she still hasn't gotten over the old trauma. Everyone will believe it. Reading those words sent a stabbing pain through me and a chill down my spine. So the pitting looks a few relatives had given me were not by chance. They had all been part of a filthy plan to break me. I immediately forwarded the evidence to Ray. He sat silently for a few seconds, then nodded. This isn't just cruelty within a family. This is collusion to smear your reputation legally. It could be considered defamation. Rai quickly backed up all the messages and added them to the case file. His voice was sharp. We'll bring this into the charges. They have no room left to deny it. Before I had even recovered from the meeting with Hannah, another call came. This time, it was from a fabric supplier for Sophia's boutique. The man was direct. I'm calling to ask if you really agreed to these invoices Sophia sent because your name appears on the paperwork as a co-owner. Stunned, I asked him to send me a copy. When the file arrived, my heart sank. There it was, my name, Bonnie, alongside a forged signature next to Sophia's. They had used my name to place orders, exploiting my credit to secure favorable terms with the supplier. I forwarded the document straight to Ray, his brow furrowed, anger clear on his face. This is fraud and impersonation. They've broken the law beyond any doubt. The news spread faster than I expected. In the small community where I lived, whispers began to circulate. From Sophia's boutique shutting down to the bank repossessing her car to murmurs that the Bonnie family was not as perfect as the image they had polished for years. One regular customer leaned in and whispered to me, everyone always thought your parents were the model couple with successful children, but I hear it's all unraveling now. I simply stayed quiet and gave a faint smile. I didn't need to add anything. Truth was already speaking loudly enough. Rai immediately added the new evidence to the legal file: financial fraud, impersonation, and systematic harassment. He explained, the key point is that we don't just have the video of vandalism. We now have documents showing they used your name for personal gain. This is going to backfire on them. Hearing the words fraud and impersonation made me feel both pain and relief. Pain because it was my own parents who had joined Sophia in orchestrating this scheme. Relief because at last the light of the law was shining into the darkness they had created. That night I received another anonymous message on Instagram. You shouldn't meddle in family business. Stay quiet before things get worse. I knew instantly it had come from Sophia or someone close to her. But instead of trembling, I took a screenshot, saved it, and deleted it from my phone. I no longer allowed such cheap threats to take root in my mind. I had built a wall of protection around me now, truth and the law. In the days that followed, the tension in the community became even more visible. A few of Sophia's old friends stopped interacting with her on social media. Some suppliers canceled their contracts. Even the church my parents regularly attended began to murmur. I heard from an acquaintance that the priest had given a reminder. No one gains anything by turning family into a tool for deceit. It was the first time I felt the blind faith of our relatives and neighbors in the perfect Bonnie family begin to crack. I did not rejoice in their downfall. I felt no glee when I heard the boutique was on the verge of bankruptcy. What I felt most deeply was fairness. They had once wielded family ties as a weapon, had exploited my credibility for their gain, had pushed me into the shadows so they could shine. Now the light was turned directly on them, exposing every fracture, and I knew this was only the beginning of a larger confrontation to come in court. The court date arrived sooner than I expected. In the weeks leading up to it, Ray and the civil attorney he had introduced to me prepared every file, numbered each piece of evidence, and backed up all the data onto both USB drives and printed documents. I was told again and again, all you need to do is tell the truth, stay calm, and let the law do the rest. Still, as I approached the King County Courthouse in downtown Seattle, my heart pounded and my hands were cold. Before me, the gray stone building loomed with its tall steps leading up to heavy wooden doors. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, knowing this was not just a hearing, but a turning point that would shape the rest of my life. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick. I sat on the plaintiff's side with my attorney, Rai seated right behind me like a solid wall of support. Across from us, Sophia and her husband sat stiffly, faces hard and tense. What cut me, though it came as no surprise, was the presence of my parents. They chose to sit beside Sophia, just behind the defendant's row, their cold eyes passing over me as if I were a stranger. I had braced myself for that possibility, but seeing them truly aligned with the other side still made me tremble. The trial began with the presentation of evidence. My attorney first showed the security camera footage of Ethan and his friend vandalizing my car and smashing the shop window. On the large screen in the courtroom, every detail was clear. The club striking the glass, the bursts of laughter, and Ethan's face visible beneath the hood. The room fell completely silent when the clip ended, broken only by faint whispers and the judge's pen tapping lightly on the bench. Then came the forged invoices with my name and signature provided by the supplier. My lawyer highlighted the inconsistencies in the handwriting, comparing them with samples of my genuine signature. Next were the messages Hannah had given us, the conversation between Sophia and my mother about setting Bonnie up. Hannah was called to the stand, her voice trembling but firm. I saw it with my own eyes, and I don't want to stay silent anymore. Then it was my turn. I stood, my hands clenched tightly, and told the story from the beginning. The anniversary dinner, the freezing soda in my lap, the laughter that echoed around the table, the mocking messages, and the crushing feeling of being cast out of my own family. When I repeated Ethan's words, Mom said, "You don't belong here." I glanced briefly at my mother. She lowered her head, offering no denial, but showed not the slightest sign of remorse. In that moment, I realized I no longer expected recognition from her. All I wanted was for justice to stand on the side of truth. The defense attorney tried to argue that this was merely a family dispute blown out of proportion, that Ethan's actions were nothing more than childish mischief, and that Sophia had only asked for help financially rather than coercing me. They even claimed I had misinterpreted the situation when I believed I was being set up. But when the judge ordered the video of the vandalism to be replayed and the messages displayed again, the defense's words quickly fell apart. The lines, "We need to prove Bonnie is unstable," lit up on the screen, undeniable to everyone present in the courtroom. After several hours, the judge, a stern-faced, middle-aged woman, delivered her conclusion. She looked directly at Sophia and my parents, her voice sharp and precise. "This is not a private family matter that can be solved with a dinner or an apology. This is unlawful conduct, property damage, financial fraud, and impersonation. The court will rule on evidence, not excuses." As I heard the verdict, my whole body felt like it had finally released its tension. Sophia and her husband were ordered to compensate me $32,000 to cover material damages, car repairs, window replacement, and part of the legal costs. Ethan was placed in a mandatory 200-hour community service program along with juvenile counseling. Most strikingly, the judge emphasized, this family must recognize that covering up and indulging such behavior only harms children, teaching them to disregard the law. My parents were not convicted directly, but their reputation fell to the lowest point. When the ruling was read aloud, several people present, including distant relatives and acquaintances, looked at them with eyes full of disappointment and contempt. I did not cheer in victory. I simply sat there listening to each word of the verdict and felt a deep sense of relief. For years, I had been treated like a shadow used as a financial tool, mocked even at my parents' anniversary dinner. And now, the truth had been spoken. Justice had been laid out, and no one could deny it. When the trial ended, I gathered my papers and walked out. I did not look at Sophia, nor at my parents. My footsteps echoed on the cold tile floor. But inside, I heard something else. The sound of release. Outside the courthouse, the Seattle wind blew strong, scattering yellow leaves through the air. Rai walked beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You did it," he said. "And from now on, you don't have to carry anyone else's burdens." I lifted my head, breathing in the sharp scent of sea air mingled in the breeze. In front of me, there was no longer the shadow of the Bonney family, but a new path when I could walk on my own feet. After the trial, I thought things would settle. But like an animal cornered, Sophia's family did not accept defeat easily. In the first few weeks, I still noticed traces of petty harassment. One morning, when I opened the shop, the words "traitor" were sprayed in red across the sidewall. Another time, my mailbox was stuffed with scraps of paper scrolled with anonymous notes. "The family will never forgive you." But this time, I did not tremble. I photographed everything and sent it straight to the police, and the difference was they no longer ignored it. Because after the verdict, the legal file was on record, and each new report I filed was handled swiftly. One familiar officer even told me, "Don't worry, we won't let this escalate any further." The difference was not only in the protection of the law, but within myself. I no longer saw those acts of harassment as a measure of my worth. Now they were nothing more than noise outside the glass, no longer able to pierce through. I poured my focus into the coffee and bakery shop, which had suddenly become livelier than ever. Customers came not only for pastries, but because my story had spread throughout the community. A local newspaper published an article titled, "The Woman Who Stood Up Against Toxic Favoritism." It told of how I built the shop on my own, how I dared to resist injustice within my family, and how I chose to protect myself. I read that article one quiet evening, feeling both moved and at peace. For the first time, my voice wasn't drowned out by the mocking laughter of relatives. It rang out as proof of resilience. The shop grew busier, sales doubling within just a few months. Fruit tarts, buttery croissants, and dark roast coffee were nearly gone before afternoon. I hired more staff, expanded the menu, and hosted small workshops for high school students on baking. Not long after, I received a letter from the Portland Small Business Association informing me that I had been honored as Small Business of the Year. I had to read the words several times before I could believe them. At the awards ceremony, I stood on stage, bright lights shining down, facing an audience full of strangers yet filled with support. I spoke briefly about my journey, emphasizing that success does not come from being coddled, but from standing tall when others want to see you fall. The applause thundered through the room, and I felt my eyes grow wet. While I was busy moving forward, news about Sophia and my parents trickled back to me, mostly through distant relatives or old acquaintances. Sophia's boutique was officially bankrupt, the landlord putting up a for lease sign. Several suppliers filed lawsuits over fraudulent contracts. Her husband, the one she used to flaunt as a brilliant business partner, lost his job because the company wanted no connection to the scandal. My parents, who once stood proudly in church and in the community as a model couple, now found themselves shunned. Someone told me that during a church service, when my father stood up to speak, the room fell into awkward silence without a single clap. The honor they had clung to for so long was crumbling piece by piece. The isolation came from the very community they had once tried to control. Whispers turned into public conversations. The Bonnies weren't perfect. They pushed down the younger daughter to pamper the elder. Now everything is out in the open. I heard these words secondhand, but I no longer felt bitterness. What I felt was justice, simple and natural, finding its way at last. One evening, as I locked up the shop, I paused at the window, the yellow streetlights spilling across the rain-slicked sidewalk. I thought about the path I had walked, from the freezing soda spilling across my dress at the anniversary dinner, to the bursts of mocking laughter, to the nights I trembled signing papers for the family. Now all of that was behind me. I no longer had to strain to prove my worth to people who never wanted to see it. I had customers, employees, and a community that valued my story. And most importantly, I had myself a stronger, freer, and respected Bonnie. I know there will still be malicious rumors, still cold stares from those who share the Bonnie name. But unlike before, I no longer feel fear or shame. What I feel now is calm. My life is not defined by their approval. It is defined by how I rose after everything and how I chose a new path for myself. And on that path, I walk with one clear belief. I don't need a toxic family to survive. I only need myself. One quiet weekend afternoon, Portland was draped in light rain. The silver-gray sky reflected on the wet sidewalks. I was wiping down the counter, rearranging the trays of pastries nearly sold out for the day, when my eyes caught the large front window. Outside, standing silently beneath the awning, were my parents. They didn't knock, didn't wave, just stood there, their eyes searching inside as if looking for something. For a moment, I felt surprised, but instead of the sharp ache that used to grip me, my heart only rippled softly and then stilled. I kept wiping the counter, adjusting the menu board as though I hadn't noticed them at all. A few minutes later, when the last faint light of the day shone through, I gently switched off the lights, locked the door, and drew the curtain. When I looked out one final time, they had already turned and walked away. No words, no tears, no staged reconciliation. Only two aging silhouettes lost in the city that once proudly called them the model family. In that moment, I realized what I had waited for all those years. A single apology, an embrace, a look of recognition was no longer necessary. I didn't feel pain anymore. I didn't feel empty. Instead, a strange peace settled over me. I was no longer binding my life to their eyes or their approval. I didn't need them to feel worthy. I had rewritten the definition of myself, and it was a definition no one could ever take away. I often hear people say blood is blood, you must forgive. But my experience taught me that sometimes blood ties are the most toxic weight of all, suffocating you until you cannot breathe. Forgiveness does not mean returning to accept being hurt again. Forgiveness at times means having the courage to let go, to walk away, and to stop waiting for them to change. True healing is not when they collapse. It is when you stop letting them define your worth. Only then can you live fully. Looking back, I see my journey not as a series of acts of revenge or punishment, but as a process of liberation. I learned how to set boundaries, how to protect what is mine, and how to build a new family from those who truly value me. They are the young employees at my shop who wake with me at dawn to bake bread. The loyal customers who leave notes saying, "Thank you for being strong." The friends who share no blood with me, yet reach out their hands whenever I need. They are the family I once thought I would never have. One evening, after the shop had closed following a busy day, I sat with a few of my staff. A young college student who had just started working part-time hesitated before asking, "Bonnie, how are you able to be so strong when facing your own family?" I smiled, took a sip of warm tea, and replied, "No one is born strong." I cried. I trembled. I wanted to give up. But one day, I realized that if I kept bowing down, I would lose myself. And when I chose to stand up, I discovered that strength had always been inside me, just waiting to be called by its name. I saw her eyes glisten, and I knew my story had become a living lesson for someone else. I want to share this message with everyone hearing my story today. You have the right to walk away from a toxic family. You have the right to choose peace over blood ties. You have the right to set boundaries even with the people who gave you life. Don't let anyone tell you that you are selfish for protecting yourself. The truth is, freedom and self-respect are never selfish. They are the foundation for building a healthy life, nurturing real love, and opening yourself to better relationships. In the end, I learned that in this journey, victory was not seeing them fall, but no longer falling because of them. Victory was not the settlement money or the court's ruling, but the mornings I opened my shop, greeted customers with a smile, and carried no fear inside me. Victory was not when they lost everything, but when I found myself. Now, every day I live within a family I chose for myself. A family built on respect, on unconditional love, and on people who don't need blood ties to see one another with fairness. I have built a new life with my own hands, a life where I am heard, where I am valued, and where I am free to be myself. And when night falls, I go to sleep in peace, knowing I am no longer the shadow in the Bonnie household. I am Bonnie, and I have found my true,